move her up and allow her to speak, and then we will commence with the rest of the ceremony.
Good afternoon, everyone, and to the Honor Guard, the leadership, the families, the men and women who are standing today in solidarity as we remember 9/11 and return to our commitment to stay unified. I am grateful that I am being supported to speak because it's also incredibly important for me to say thank you and to make sure that the state is clear about its dedication to the men and women who give so much and their families. And as we all know, today marks the 21st anniversary of the most brutal terrorist attack on our nation that we in fact have ever seen. September 11th, 2001 is a moment now in American history that cannot, and as evidenced here today, will not be forgotten. We once again give reverent pause to remember the 2,977 innocent victims from 115 nations who died on that horrific day. 2,753 in the World Trade Towers, 184 at the Pentagon. 40 passengers on United Flight 93 who died in the crash at Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Their bravery may have in fact saved our nation's Capitol building, the symbol of our democracy and freedom, and hundreds of lives when they famously shouted, "Let's roll," and they overtook their attackers. As soon as the planes crashed into the World Trade Towers, hundreds of first responders, firefighters, and policemen and women answered the distress call and rushed to danger into the burning trade towers. So many lost their lives while attempting to save the lives of others. 343 firefighters of the New York Fire Department, 37 police officers of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, 23 police officers of the New York Police Department. Today, we remember one of our own who died that day. Retired Alamogordo Police Lieutenant Al Marchand was killed when United Flight 175, scheduled to fly from Boston to Los Angeles, crashed into the World Trade Tower. What we showed the world on 9/11 was that America, when attacked, will never surrender to defeat or fear. We as a people remain united in our commitment to each other and to our country. We will always rise up to denounce terrorism, violence, bigotry, and the murder of the innocent. So today, 21 years later, we honor all those lost. We salute the first responders who answered the call and made the ultimate sacrifice, and remember the innocent victims who died that day. To their families and their loved ones, we offer you our most heartfelt prayers for your loss. It is my hope that September 11th, 2001 will not only be remembered as the day the towers fell, but forever be known as the day America stood up. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Governor. At this time, I would like to ask everyone to please stand for the presentation of the colors presented by the AFR and APD Joint Public Safety Color Guard, and for the singing of our national anthem sung by Iris Cable.
say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Everyone may be seated. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone who has come to honor the individuals and families affected from the attacks on September 11th, 2001. Now, 21 years later, we stand united in keeping our vow to never forget. Here with us this afternoon are Albuquerque Mayor Tim Keller, AFR Fire Chief Jean Gallegos, APD Deputy Chief Michael Smathers, City Councilor Brooke Bassan, City Councilor Tammy Feeblecorn. After just completing all the stairs, we also have IFF Local 244 President Miguel Titman, Bernalillo County Sheriff Manny Gonzalez, Bernalillo County Fire Chief Greg Perez, Albuquerque Ambulance Representative Shelby Stewart, and we also have the Rio Rancho Mayor, Greg Hull. I would now like to invite driver David Myers, who will lead us in the invocation.
Good afternoon. Are we on? There we go. Thank you, everyone, for having me. I appreciate it. My wife and I had the distinct honor and pleasure of experiencing the 9/11 memorial earlier this year in New York City. Our experience was incredible. I was awestruck, and I was hushed and moved to tears and almost paralyzed by the grief. It was aesthetically perfect and completely mesmerizing. It was indeed an entire experience. You see, when they were designing the memorial, they knew that people would become overwhelmed. And so they built plenty of exits. So if you had to remove yourself or excuse yourself because your senses were overloading, you could do that. They built that in. There was grace for that. And then there was the part of the tour where we just stopped and we just wept. My wife and I both. We couldn't go on anymore. It was too much. You see, I'm a chaplain for our department, and I deal almost daily in trauma work, in loss, in death, almost every day of my professional and personal life. And the idea of trauma work is not to get people to forget what they've experienced because you've experienced them. The idea is to get us to make peace with those experiences. So it is okay to remember, it's okay to be overwhelmed, it's okay to get angry all over again. All of these emotions are okay. We are all, in fact, human. That's what we do, we emote. And so there's grace for that. It's always been how we cope, how we contend, and how we heal. So may we continue to learn how to mourn in a world that gives little effort to it. May we continue to learn how to lament in a community that has no time for it. And may we continue to learn how to grieve in a society that has grown calloused to it, so that when we are faced with the monsters of this world, we do not become one. Offered to you this afternoon, September 11th. Thank you.
Thank you, Driver David Myers. I would now like to invite Mayor Tim Keller to say a few words.
Good afternoon, Albuquerque. I want to thank everyone first and foremost who's here today in person or joining on our broadcasts to pay our respects and to remember and to never forget what happened on September 11. I also want to acknowledge two groups that are fairly obvious to my left and to my right, but I'd like us to take a moment and thank our APD cadets and our AFR cadets. This is exactly what our city needs, as many people as we can get in those two groups. Thank you. You know, a new generation has come of age in the 21 years since September 11. And young people in our city and in our country and in our armed forces are now serving, and yet we're not alive to see the billowing smoke coming from the World Trade Center. Not alive to share in that "what were you doing when" story that many of us have. But this day, in the chapter in our nation's history that unfolded after it, is still present for all of us. It's present because, number one, we must never forget. That's what we say today. That's what we say each September. But it's because these memorials are extremely important. They are in many ways more important the further away we get from September 11. Because we know that on that day, this was an incredible, difficult day for every single person who was an American, whether they lived abroad, whether they lived in New Mexico, or whether they lived in Manhattan or in Washington, D.C. Loved ones were lost that day. And for those who lost children and siblings and parents in the wars that followed, continued lives were lost. The memory of those that we lost should never dim. We must remind those of the sacrifices that was made on every front that started with September 11th. We also know that the memory of that moment is a memory when we did see, very briefly, a nation that was deeply wounded. But it was in the hours that followed when we watched our first responders tap unimaginable bravery and the resolve that the country had to come together that had otherwise been trapped in fear was extraordinary. And for each of us, there was a moment, slightly different, person to person, when we decided that we could summon the courage to carry on. He'll be all right, and it happens from time to time. So as we reflect on this day, we remember that we cannot control, unfortunately, the hate that exists in this world, but we can choose our response. That is also what was incredibly powerful about what we saw in September 11. Now, when we face tragedy, we know that we must respond with courage. That is something that we must also never forget and that we are reminded of today. When those Twin Towers fell, we lifted each other up. We opened our hearts, and we made sure that those who were in the deepest pain knew that we would never have to go through it alone. Walls that had previously stood between people, even between race and class and politics, those walls came down after September 11. Those acts of bravery, love, and generosity gave us a sense of common purpose. It was a time of pain and of grieving, but also one of great resolve, one that bound us together for generations to come. And when intolerance, born out of fear, raised its head, we talked about it and we tamped it down. And now 20 years on, this generation that does not remember personally what happened on September 11, they are some of the most tolerant and diverse and welcoming people in our nation, really, that our nation has ever produced. This is all being passed on, and this is what we reflect on today. As our world remembers September 11, I remember our resilience and our call to be ready at home for whatever may happen. We do not take American unity forged in this time that I shared with you for granted either, as we know what's going on all across our country today. It's important that we remember how unified we were just 20 years ago. We know that that unity will always be tested. In some ways, it's part of fundamentally who we are as Americans. But we also know that we showed that in our darkest days, we absolutely are one nation, undivided. So as we continue our service to a better future, and we remember our unbreakable faith in each other, it's a debt that we owe to those that we did lose on September 11. So we dedicate this day to them, to an America that has better angels carrying us toward an unimaginable future, but that also remembers what we showed in terms of strength and courage on that day. We carry all these memories forward in part so that the generations to come will never forget. Thank you so much, and God bless Albuquerque.
Thank you, Mayor Keller. I would now like to invite Fire Chief Jean Gallegos to say a few words.
Hello, and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us here today. As many of the dignitaries have already stated, we are here today to remember and recognize the sacrifice and dedication of all those that tragically lost their lives 21 years ago. Now today, listening to everybody talk about that faithful day, one of the words I hear consistently repeated about our brothers and sisters is dedication. What does dedication mean to you? What does dedication mean to me? To me, dedication means commitment, perseverance, devotion, faith, and resolution. The definition of dedication is the adherence to something to which one is bound by a pledge or duty. I agree with those words that were used to describe our brothers and sisters. And I absolutely believe it is true for all those that entered the tower that day. I can only imagine what was racing through their minds, looking up as they walked through those doors. Regardless, they were dedicated. Dedicated to the safety and survival of others. Over 1,000 public safety officers were there knowing the price they may pay to save others. Once the fires were extinguished and the dust settled, 343 FDNY, 67 NYPD, and countless others lost their lives in the service to their community. We know their memory will never be forgotten. I had the honor of visiting the 9/11 Memorial in New York. One of the walls in the memorial there said, "No day shall erase you from the memory of time. A powerful statement. Now, how do we remember and honor their sacrifice? Every member of our community must ask themselves this question. As the mayor mentioned, I realized there are several of our newest members here that were not even alive during those tragic events that occurred 21 years ago. It is important that we remember their sacrifice and how the world changed that day. It is also important to instill in our younger generation the sacrifices older generations made before them. They may not have been alive that day, but their lives have been changed by it, as all of ours have. And it is also important to remember that if similar events occurred today, we ourselves would be asked to do the same as they did, in hopes that others would live. On the top of the training tower, located at AFR's Training Academy, we have a plaque dedicated to our fallen brothers and sisters. This plaque reads, Thank you, 99th Cadet Class. Now, every time I run the tower, and all those that do, touch this very plaque to show respect and remembrance. But it is also a way we continue the responsibility of training to be ready for whatever is to come. And by doing this, we honor them. To close, I know this day is to remember that 21 years ago, our brothers and sisters made the ultimate sacrifice for the safety of others. But it is also a day to celebrate the love, kindness, resilience, and dedication that our brothers and sisters showed, and the example they paved for us to follow. We will always remember, and we will never forget.
I went out of order, and we now have Deputy Chief Mike Smathers to speak next. No pressure on him. He also has to go throw the first pitch at the Public Safety Isotopes game after this, so I apologize.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is an honor to be here, and I want to thank Chief Gallegos for having APD be a part of this remembrance. On 9/11, I was a much younger officer preparing to be a sergeant. I have vivid memories of that particular day, the many images of destruction, the loss of life. And for all of us, I know those were impactful. They were very much to me, and they remain with me today. It's important to reflect on the 415 first responders who died that day. 343 has been mentioned, were members of FDNY. I certainly recognize also that almost 3,000 innocent citizens perished that day. But on this day, for this particular ceremony, I wanted to reflect on the first responders. We've all seen those iconic images of fire and police rescue personnel walking up the stairs of those towers while thousands of others were walking down in an attempt to escape. I've often wondered, what did it take for those brave men and women to set aside their personal sacrifice, their love for their families, their friends, to go and do what they clearly knew was probable to certain death or serious injury. Now, the book of Isaiah has a verse that I think encapsulates that dedication to service above self when it says, "I heard the Lord asking, whom shall I send? "Who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." Chief Gallegos, I believe that encapsulates those men and women of FDNY that day, and all of your firefighters and paramedics here at AFR who say, "Here am I, send me," each and every day. And I am personally and professionally thankful for each of you. I'm also thankful for all of my APD colleagues who serve this city so faithfully. It's an occupational hazard in policing, but actions always speak louder than words to me. And that remains true when I think about the work AFR does for us and with us in Albuquerque. And two recent examples stand out and resonate with me. All of you will remember a little over a year ago, in August of 2021, we had 4 officers that were shot in a single incident attempting to capture an armed robbery suspect. AFR paramedics and personnel entered a very dynamic and very dangerous scene to render literal life-saving help to those officers who had been shot. Those actions of those men and women that day saved APD officers' lives. And then recently we had a SWAT situation, which unfortunately we had a house fire at that location. And AFR was already staged nearby, but once they realized the gravity of the situation with the fire, they self-deployed to that scene. And that scene certainly exceeded the normal dangers and perils that they face at any house fire, and those alone are significant. And they literally stood shoulder to shoulder with officers fighting that fire, trying to save the occupants of that home, once again showing their courage and dedication. I am so thankful that men and women continue to answer the call for service to this community. AFR, APD, the Sheriff's Office, New Mexico State Police, and all of the many, many medical first responders. So please accept my heartfelt thanks for your willingness to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and for the work that you do each and every day and the partnerships that we have in this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Smathers. Good luck with your pitch. I would now like to invite Fire Chief Gene Gallegos and the AFD Retirees Association for the last alarm presentation.
The fire service custom of rendering final honors with a series of bell strikes has its origin in fire departments of old. Years ago, before the advent of radios, pagers, and cell phones, fire alarms and daily announcements were dispatched from the department central headquarters to outlining firehouses by a series of bell commands. Each alarm or announcement had its own number and series of bell strikes. The custom for Albuquerque Fire Rescue of rendering final honors to our departed comrades is known as striking the 4 5s. When a firefighter responds on his or her last alarm, headquarters would transmit 5 bell strikes repeated 4 times, followed by the announcements that a firefighter had passed away. In keeping with this tradition, on this 21-year anniversary of the horrific events of 9/11, and in honor of all the brave men and women that lost their lives that day, I now ask all to please stand. I, Albuquerque Fire Chief Gene Gallegos, will give the order to strike the 4 5s. The signal of 4-5s has been transmitted. With deep respect, the men and women of Albuquerque Fire Rescue mourn the deaths of all those that died on this day 21 years ago.
This concludes our 9/11 memorial ceremony. Thank you all for your attendance today.